Hey guys, so for this episode we are going to be designing a repeating pattern. Originally I would design this as a screen print pattern, but this is going to be a bit of a variation on that idea. The way that I like to do it, and this isn't the only way to do it, is I like to start my drawing at the edges of the design by folding the paper so that the edges meet in the middle and making my drawing across the seam. This way, when you unfold it, you know that it will actually conjoin itself when it repeats. And I'll do that in both directions, left to right and top to bottom, so that once I've tiled this out, it will actually create a repeating pattern. This particular design, I'm going for a sort of cascading waterfall of toilet paper. It kind of suits my mood for the day. So this is going to be, it's probably going to end up being a stencil design and maybe a digital design. But right now I want to get it down on paper before I get crazy about how it's going to look in color. So right now I'm just kind of rendering the design and making some decisions about how those edges are going to look before I address the middle area. Once you get to the middle part of the drawing, once you've got your edges kind of resolved, you can start to think about how the composition is going to look in the middle of your drawing. Keep in mind that if you put a big object in the middle, it will catch the eye in a way that will subtract movement from the overall effect of it as a wallpaper. So with this particular design, I'm placing several rolls at different heights and angles so that as you look at the composition, it should have a lot of kind of unfurling movement. And that has to do with, even though it's only repeating in a sort of square grid formation, you can do other types of repeats where it repeats offset. But in this particular really simple demo, I'm just going to be doing that basic grid. I like to call it the bathroom tile repeat versus the laying bricks repeat. And so once I've got my edges kind of resolved, I can start to think about folding it top ways and looking at how they're going off the other side. Yeah. As you go, you can kind of erase, and sometimes it's actually really helpful to think about it how it is now, but also think about how it's going to look when it's in duplicate. So what I like to do with this particular design is I'm just kind of figuring out, I want kind of even spaces, and I want a sort of beautiful sinuous line to the toilet paper rolls. So I'm adding some more that are kind of behind other ones and sticking them in front and trying to get a sort of beautiful toilet paper distribution so that this kind of will look a little bit more evenly sort of placed in this cascade once it repeats. Eventually you're going to get to a point where you kind of you think you know what it's going to look like, but you're actually going to need to see how it repeats for you to know what you might want to change. So for that, I actually took it to the window, because I don't have a light table in my home, held up my original design, and traced it out onto a second sheet of paper. And so here you can see that I'm kind of inspecting how that repeat is going to happen. I can kind of take the second one and hold it up adjacent to the first one and just see how that drawing is going to traverse across the edge. See how I like it, decide if I want to make some changes, and you can do this with a photocopy machine. I like to photocopy it 4 times, and then you can get a sort of 4x4 grid and really get a sense of how that repeat's going to look in all the directions. But I don't have a photocopy machine in my home, so I'm just gonna have to make do with the single copy. I feel like I have a pretty good sense of it, although I really don't like this big dark space over here on the right. So I'm going to realize a little bit later that if I want to do a cut stencil version of this design, I actually want all of my toilet paper rolls to touch each other at some point so that a cut stencil version of this drawing would hold together. So I'm trying not to worry too much about how I'm going to cut it in this first draft of the drawing, because I can always make changes to it. And so my change here is with that big black area on the bottom edge is I'm going to go in and actually add in another toilet paper roll there, just so that the they kind of, the spacing is a little bit better. The next thing is, so I can check that out, looking good. Yeah, liking that repeat. Yeah, I think this is going to be really fun. So the last step that you want to do is you want to ink in your design. So if you're thinking about translating this, you want to make that decisive final mark. If you're going to be feeding this into a Photoshop or Illustrator program, having an ink design will mean that if you photograph it or scan it, you'll have a really crisp design to work from. So one of the things that I like to do personally is I'll scan in a drawing and then I might color it in Illustrator or Photoshop. And if you color it in with each color on its own separate layer, then that translates really well to screen print, which, by the way, this is for a screen printing class. But at this point when I'm inking it, it's also a chance to make any final changes. So it's sort of like this sort of final cut editor's review pass. So I just got my like chunky Sharpie and I'm just trying to take it slow and continuing to fold it. Whenever I draw across the seam, I check it by folding it. But I really want that sort of smooth, continuous line. Here I've decided that I don't like that big black space, and before I've inked it in, I'm adding in a new little roll here to divide up that space a little bit differently. And this is just going to give me like a really crisp outline and also help me see how the positive and negative space is getting broken up by this drawing. And as a final touch, I want to kind of shade in the little like holes on the toilet paper roll. And I think if this was a screen print, right, I think I probably would just do this in two colors. One color for the background and a black layer for the lines and shadows inside the rolls. So this is kind of set up for a two-color layer. You know, you can erase and make changes. But at this point, I would say this is pretty close. I can just go ahead and photograph it. They have some really good document scanner apps that take a photograph but do it in a really like opaque black and white way so that it's basically ready for editing on the computer. But for this one, I'm actually going to make a cut paper stencil so that I can kind of apply ink by hand through these little lines. So, all right, and that's it. Thank you so much.